Well, it's that time again, that time when we step into our favorite virtual watering hole, cozy up to the bar, and discuss the thanatological issues of the day. I'm joined by Greg and Ken. I'm your host, Chris, and this is Three Pastors Walk Into a Bar. I use thanatological because Ken uses thanatological later on.
Yeah, what's that mean?
It's a pretty fancy word that just means the kind of the study of death, study of things that relate to death.
I like
that
it.
was a new one.
Thanatological.
That was a new word.
Thanatological.
I wonder if that's where we get the term for the Marvel villain Thanos.
Thanos.
I knew you were going to ask that.
I knew I was going to ask that too.
You knew?
Yeah. As soon as you said it.
It deals with death. I mean, he does kill half the people in the universe.
Mhm.
So
We get him back. What do we call
we,
him?
we get him back. we get him back. Spoiler
alert.
We get him back. No need to fear. We get
Don't
him
worry
back.
about it. That's why the Avengers are here.
Oh, man. No need for a disclaimer today because these are our opinions. So it's too bad, too, because I like the disclaimer.
Why don't you read it today, Chris?
Yeah, we
Since
don't
it has
really
no
need
value.
Nah, because it wouldn't mean anything.
Exactly.
Yeah, it would just be like
Words flying through the air.
yeah, like so much other things today.
Facetious?
Just
Like Christian movies?
words without meanings. Words without meaning just drifting through the
Yeah.
ether. Yeah, falling on deaf ears. Having teachers with having itching ears, bringing in teachers that tickle our itching ears.
What our itching ears want to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, today we are discussing the idea of America's obsession with death and murder. And we have this verse of scripture here, albeit this verse is taken completely out of context. But there's a philosophical thing, I guess, that can be brought out of this because we kind of do look at the world this way. 1 Corinthians chapter 13:12, for now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I have been fully known. And the idea that you're driving at here, Ken, is that, there's a mirror and we're looking in that mirror, and in that mirror is the eventuality of our mortality.
Mm-hmm.
Basically is kind of what you're driving at in this idea of the mirror. And I think that that's true to a degree. I think that all people think about their mortality more than they're willing to admit that they do.
Yeah.
And
I was thinking about it this morning. Standing, guess what I was doing?
when you get as
Standing
old
in front of the mirror.
when you get as old as you are, you start thinking about mortality a lot.
Yeah.
A
A lot. And then the pain.
and then the pain starts.
And then your eyes start going bad. I can't do
You
what
start
I
getting
used to
floaters
do.
in your eye. Yeah, it begins to go downhill. It's funny because at the end of service, was it? I can't remember if it was first service or second service, but I had made this comment about how time is relative to your age. So as you get older, time is way faster. It just like
That was second service.
was it? Yeah. And we have a dear gentleman here who's been in our church for a very long time, Lane. And he comes up to me and he's like, yeah, thank you for letting the young people know that you got something to look forward to when you get older. Like it's no picnic.
You're on the back.
And he kind of went into this discussion about how it would be really good if public schools or places of education would have courses on like basic ideas of geriatrics. Like this is what it's going to look like. You're going to age, you're going to get older. These people that are walking around, hobbling around on their canes, they've been where you are, and they are where they're at, and so helping them to have a little understanding about as you walk into that time, because I think probably he might be right. A lot of people who are older, they are shocked at the change and the things that happen to your body.
And some people
and
really
your mind.
struggle with physical change. I know some people who are, and a lot of these are probably what we see as hypochondriacs. It's like your body starts aging, it starts doing things differently, feeling differently, and that's not right. I have to go to the doctor. This should not be. I should not have pain here or discomfort here or confusion or whatever it is. And they're trying to medicate things back to their youth when it's just a natural progression of growth. Stuff changes.
Adriana always says, when I get to heaven, I'm going to have to apologize to my grandma because she used to complain all the time about grandma won't shut up. She's got every ailment in the history of the world coming down upon her.
Because poor grandma's hurting.
She was hurting, and now Adriana is there and looking back and going, "Oh my gosh, I should have been nicer." So that's kind of what you're saying is that, have a little empathy for and sympathy for the old folks in your life.
Yeah, and understand that they have something to offer and that they're dealing with something that is just kind of an abstract to you at this point.
Young people, you ain't going to get it.
Yeah,
you're just not going to get it till you're there.
Yeah, once you get past the halfway point and you come to the gross realization that you have less years ahead of you than you have behind you.
Welcome to the club, Chris.
You know, it really brings into sharp relief the idea that, wow, I'm going to leave this world at some point, and I'm no longer going to be here. And it really does test your faith in some areas if you're being honest, because it's like, do I really believe that when I die, there's something more, because the terrifying thought is that what if I'm wrong and there is nothing, but then you start thinking that through. It's like, well, if I die and there is nothing, then I've lost nothing.
I won't know.
So,
but I've lived a good life.
So logically, it doesn't even matter.
In Christ.
Right.
But then you're like, okay, well, no, there's definitely something more to humanity than just matter.
Yeah.
There's consciousness, and there's something to that, right? And so, you kind of work through those things, but dealing with mortality is something that man has been doing as an abstract for all of history. I mean, every culture that has ever existed has had some means of putting a face on death, whether it's the Greek, it's the Romans, the Assyrians, the Jews, the Egyptians.
They did a great job.
I mean, it's like every culture that has ever existed has had a way of putting some type of visible face on death to remove it out of the abstract and the invisible and bring it into a physical kind of visceral reality, because it is going to be a real experience for everyone.
Before we came on the air, we were talking about movies, and some of the movies that have gone with that theme, life after death, near-death experiences. I like those from the standpoint of no matter how it's portrayed, there's hope. There seems to be hope there. It's like there's something there. We don't know what it is, the old adage of, I see the light at the end of the tunnel, and I hope it's not a freight train, that has been an experience for me that I've appreciated over the years. And just recently I read an article about a doctor that said in his practice of 30 years, he saw way too many near-death experiences to let it go.
Write it off.
Unnoticed. Yeah. And so he has written a book and, all that stuff. Just another guy that says something's there. Not a believer, but something's there.
Yeah.
They don't know what it is.
Yeah. I mean, you have that genre, and then you have the other one that deals with the afterlife. And it's either as a passing adventure, like you're going on, like you must descend into Hades to do this thing and then come back, right? Or it's a comedy about going to heaven and being and encountering all the things that you've done. I mean, we've all seen those comedies where it's like, this is your life kind of thing, and so, it's funny because mankind has a strange way of dealing with the reality of death. It's either, we're going to dismiss it and just not think about it, or we're going to face it and venture into it, or we're going to laugh about it. And in all of those cases, we're either trying to forego any need for hope, or we're trying to find hope, because it's the most final thing of our lives. And it's the one thing that you have no choice in.
Right. Hope we're all going to die, as they say.
I mean, you don't get to decide. You have no power over it at all. Which is one interesting thing of why
I think. Can I butt in here for a second?
Yeah.
Euthanasia.
Right.
I think that might help certain people to think, I do have power, I can control this. But ultimately, you're still dead. But it gives you the power of when I can go.
And that's a lot of the allure of that.
Yeah.
you get to go out on your terms, kind of thing.
On your terms, on your timetable.
Yeah. I mean, I can definitely see the allure of that. And it's hard to say that, I would never be in a position to where I would think that way. Mm-hmm. But then again, I mean, I don't live a life of pain like some people live. I mean, you think about pain, it's hard to conceptualize pain when you don't have it. Mm-hmm. Like, it's hard to really understand how bad pain is. Like, try and remember, like, how painful your last toothache was, Ken, right?
Yeah. Like,
yeah.
Yesterday.
Like, you can think about it, right? And I can think about the last time that I had a bad toothache, but I also can remember me saying in the moment just how terrible that it was. And if you imagine having that all the time, day in, day out, the only cure that you have for it is just pain management. I mean, it would get to the point where it's just exhausting. And
there was a point last week when this abscess was the worst, and I barely slept for 2 days, and it was like 2 or 3 in the morning, and it was just, there was no comfort, there was no touching it. And it's like, I think I understand a little better why people commit suicide. When they're in that state, it's like, I don't see this getting better. This is unbearable. There's no bright light in my life right now. I just want to be done.
Not on that same level, but, Adriana's been dealing with her eyes for, a year now. And just to watch her at certain points just break down. Like, I can't do this anymore. I'm done.
Yeah.
And, it's like, honey, I'm here for you,
Well,
but nothing I could do.
There's nothing you can do except for just offer emotional support.
Yeah.
And it's...
And that wears out after a while, too.
Yeah, and it also makes you thankful at the end. Like, when the pain is gone, you're like, thank God I feel normal again. Like, it
never thought it was going to happen.
Living a pain-free life is a miracle.
It is.
It really is.
It's one of the common graces that we take so much for granted.
Yes, living a pain-free life, man. Don't take that for granted.
My thumb is hurting right now.
Well,
constant. I mean, it's just, there's pain. You get to my age and
everything hurts.
Everything hurts. We joke around.
You got to get out of bed. You're like, ugh.
What's this all about? Do I really have to do this, Lord?
Yeah, even so, Lord Jesus, come. Right?
Come. Oh, yeah. Maranatha is on my lips a lot.
So, but mortality is something that we obviously deal with. And you had mentioned something in the background about it being a social taboo. And I don't know that. I mean, I know that that's an accepted terminology, but I don't know that that's actually true. I don't know that it's a taboo subject.
I don't think it's as much as it used to be. I think part of, like I wrote in the script here, we've we've kind of normalized death. We've been way more exposed to it, through medicine and through life experiences and entertainment, recreation, all these sorts of things that I think we've normalized it to a degree. But in generations past, I think it was much more of a taboo because there was so much more unknown about it. I think we understand a lot more about it now, and both scientifically and experientially, that it's less of a taboo. But, in some circles with some people, they're afraid of saying, I'm going to die.
I'm going to die. Yeah.
Or he passed. He went on to a better place. We soften it. We pad it. Instead
Dude's
of just
dead,
saying,
man.
He died. You're going to die.
Well, that's one of the first things that you learn in if you're a chaplain,
Yeah,
particularly for giving death notifications, which was one of the worst things that we did.
You got to have some sensitivity there.
Well, you got to have some sensitivity, but also what you're trained to do is you're trained to not soften it at all. You would say something like, are you so-and-so? And then you would ask for their ID to verify that they are who they say they are and that they are related. Because the worst thing to do would be to tell someone their relative is dead and then
That would be horrible.
it not be them, right? Then you would say, I'm sorry to inform you that tonight your so-and-so has died in a car accident or in... and it was always they have died. It's never they've passed on or they're no longer with us or anything like that, because you're right. In the softening of that, what happens is people have a hard time processing that. Whereas if you just say, I'm sorry to inform you that this person has died, then it's immediate. It's like ripping the Band-Aid off. It's clear. Like, okay, they've died. I have to deal with this. And then that's when you can actually begin working. But yeah, it probably is a lot less taboo, but I don't know, man. I look back at like the 20s, and I've done a lot of research on the occult, and I don't know if it was more of an interest in the occult or if it was more of an interest in death or if it was more of an interest in the macabre in general. But the 20s, the late 20s, early 20s, first part of the 20th century, there were a lot of people that were fascinated with the idea of death. And it was a common topic. I mean, so common that people would have seances in their house just as like parlor games. Taboo, maybe. Maybe it was made more taboo in the 50s and 60s, 40s, 50s and 60s, maybe.
Nobody wanted to die in the 50s and 60s.
Those were kind of the golden years. So it's like party on because
life was
we
good.
don't want to talk about death.
Life was good after the war, I think that was probably a big part of it.
Maybe. I mean, some people's lives were good. Some people's lives were not so good.
They're always,
but
going to have that.
But yeah, maybe. I think a lot of taboos arose in that time period. Taboos with not only death, but taboos with sexuality, taboos with, language and speech. A lot of taboos came out of the 40s, 50s, and 60s as evangelicalism rose to probably the height that it had reached at a time as a moral imperative. And so, a lot of taboos arose out of that. And for better or for worse, some of them probably were not as beneficial to us as we thought that they were going to be. But at the time, maybe it is. Maybe people are more ready to talk about death today than they have been in the past. I don't know, but there does seem to be a lot of conversation about it. There does seem to be a lot of it in your face. That's for sure.
For the Christian believer, the true believer, it shouldn't bring any problems with our psyche knowing that we're going to die. That should be a time for us that we are looking forward to. To live is Christ, to die is gain. And for me, as I grow older, like I said, just this morning, I'm standing there in front of the mirror and I'm going, it came to me. I'm going to die someday. I was listening to old hymns on my phone and I don't remember what it was. It brought that to my mind, but I'm going to die, and probably within the next 25 years.
Yeah.
Hopefully more, but
I usually have those thoughts like right as I lay down at night. Like I'll lay down and I'll be getting ready to go to sleep. And then I'll either look over at Kim or I'll look up at the ceiling and I'll think to myself, there's going to be a moment where I'm going to exit this world.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to be here anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to leave Kim behind and we're not going to be here anymore. And
I think,
so Kim has forbade me from dying until I have to make it to 98, because ultimately what she has designed is that once I reach 98, she's going to be of an age where she's ready to go, and then we're going to lay down in bed and we're going to die together. That's
okay.
Like
the
the
Notebook.
pretty much.
Yep.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, and we all walked away from that rolling our eyes. Like,
Yeah.
Well, Adriana's got a scenario. It's all set. She's ready to go.
Where she's going to murder you?
Well, no, actually,
okay.
her pain was so bad that we always joke about they shoot horses, don't they? And she goes, honey, think about it. You shoot me. I no longer have pain. I'm in heaven. You're in jail. You get 3 meals a day in a bed, And I'm
Taking care of you, honey.
Wow.
Yeah, she was doing this from a standpoint of, I want you to be happy without me.
She really thought that out.
She did.
Yeah, because nothing makes a guy
scary.
happier than being trapped in a prison with a bunch of other dudes. That's where you find real joy in your life.
Oh, yeah.
But obviously, mass media is something that promotes this idea.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the difference. Is we've just been talking about our own deaths, or the deaths of the believer, which is a very different experience than what we see in popular culture. It's polar opposite.
Yeah,
and we're just being inundated and soaked in that imagery of death, and how desensitized it's become, how cheapened it's become,
right.
How graphic and extreme we keep pushing the barrier of exploring what it is like to die.
Yeah, I mean,
as opposed to reality, because we've all sat with somebody in their last moments, and it's not like the popular culture envisions it. A few exceptions, like movies like The Notebook, where it's all very sweet and fictional, but reality is very different. And it just seems there's something weird going on in our culture around that whole subject.
Yeah,
that I think was worth exploring here in this episode.
There's definitely, it is pervasive to a degree that is probably unhealthy. I definitely can agree with that. I mean, if you look at that one statistic that you put in there where it's like 1/3 of listings in the TV Guide. Now, this was back in 2002. So, I mean, it's got to be more today, because I don't know that I have seen a TV show where there was not death of some kind as either a feature or a component. And I guess it would be fair to say that it would be hard to tell a human story without the component of death. But I guess the question is how is that death dealt with? Like, is it dealt with in such a way that it is healthy, or is it dealt with in such a way that it is unhealthy? Now, a lot of the I don't know that there's a lot of statistics out there for modern viewers.
That's an interesting thought. What is healthy? A healthy view of death as opposed to an unhealthy view of death. We're talking like violent death as opposed to, going peacefully in a hospital bed. What would you consider?
That's
healthy versus unhealthy.
It's really hard to determine that because, if you take a purely scriptural view of it, um, death is always dealt with in a very visceral, real way
Mm-hmm.
in Scripture. It's never portrayed as being less than what it is.
I think that it's an issue of human dignity. A lot of our popular culture really dumbs down the human dignity in death and dying and killing as opposed to the reality.
And I think that's probably because that's the way that type of thing is. Like if you're talking about murder, which there's a lot of it, like it's pervasive in our culture, to the point where even murderers are glorified in our culture. Yeah, if you deal with murder, there's nothing dignified about murder at all, or terrorism, or captivity, or any of that. I mean, those things are designed to remove dignity. So I mean that there is the truth of that as well, and there could be an argument that you don't want to be too soft about death and let people have kind of a false view of the way that it is or the reality of it, but then also you don't want to glorify it by cheering for it. I think that would be, if I'm thinking about it and I'm talking through it, I think that might be one of my qualifiers for an appropriate portrayal of death. If you are portraying death and you are cheering for it in such a way that it is malicious, that's probably a poor way of looking at it, because there's nothing glamorous or wonderful about death. It is a passageway, but then also, I mean, it's like we shouldn't be murdering people and then celebrating that.
Yeah, there's nothing noble about death through hatred.
The Holocaust, comes to mind as we're talking about that, where death was just an over-the-top, everyday occurrence. And many of these people that were performing these executions, they became numb to it. Looking at your next topic here, the average American by age 16 has seen 18,000 murders on television.
I would say that number is way higher than that at this
probably
point.
double.
I was watching some of my family members play one of the Bang Bang Shoot 'em Up games the other day. And just for a few moments, I just, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They were killing each other every 5 seconds. And they're seeing that. And the graphics on these new games are like, some of them are over graphic, I think. I think it's like, nobody needs to see that. That's reality in a cartoon, and it shouldn't be shown. That's just me. Because when it happens in reality, we are becoming more and more numb to it, just like in the Holocaust. It got to a point where, we're not really murdering, we're just eliminating these people.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly that. I mean, I would say that that's more related to psychopathy as opposed to, being desensitized to it. I mean, there's a certain degree of desensitization that occurs there, I'm sure. But also, I mean, it's hard to compare kind of entertainment today with things like the Holocaust, because you need to show a fair portrayal of what occurred to those people in such a way that it is visceral enough that it becomes a reality. This was kind of the big thing that was the topic of discussion with The Passion when it first came out. Because if you recall The Passion when it first came out, a lot of Christians were rejecting it because it was just brutal. And just the imagery that was shown was violent to the point that people were getting sick, and people couldn't take it, right? But that's the way that it was. So there's something to be said about the removal of reality by media being as dangerous as the opposite of that, the overemphasis and celebration of reality. It used to be that death was like a common thing. Like every day you dealt with death in one way or another. You either had to go out and slay an animal, or like just take the Passover, for instance. I mean, there's nothing beautiful about that. You would slay this animal, shed all of its blood. I mean, if you went to the temple, the floor would be slick with blood. Mm-hmm. They would have to cast salt over the floor so that the priests weren't slipping around. They wore scarlet robes so that it would mask some of the blood that was just covering everything because of all the sacrifices. And and people would take their whole families to go offer the Passover lamb, and so they would be standing there with their children amidst all of this blood and gore that was happening as a result of sin. It was a lesson in this is the consequences of us being disobedient to God. Is something has to pay the price. And so even in Scripture, there is this definite lesson that is being taught that the consequence of sin is violent and terrible, and we can't forget that.
And blood
It
must be shed.
It might be part of the reason why people are so insensitive to the seriousness of sin in our society today. And it could be that it's not necessarily because it's portrayed the way that it's portrayed in the world. That shouldn't surprise us. The problem is that we don't talk about sin in the way that it should be talked about, and we don't have anything physical to demonstrate to us how terrible sin is on a regular basis. Yeah. Like, we don't have a symbology that demonstrates that to us, that has not been kind of filtered in such a way that it's palatable.
Yeah, we've sanitized it.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's very clean. It happens in a white room in a special building with special people, and you leave the room when it happens. And you don't see anything until a funeral, and we don't do open caskets much anymore.
Yeah,
we've hidden it a lot.
Yeah,
it's a little bit of the taboo.
And so that might be where the taboo that you're talking about comes into play. We kind of have sanitized it quite a bit to where it becomes offensive to us when we see it.
Yeah, whereas generations ago, a couple hundred years ago, you'd have, when somebody died, they may be in the house for days until they were buried.
Shoot, they might get shot in the street, and you're just looking at them and going, oh, well, there's another one.
Born into Catholicism, raised in Catholicism, and we oftentimes, chastise Catholics for having their crucifixions hanging around their necks and hanging in their churches and everything with Christ still on the cross. And that in itself has been sanitized. If you're going to show him on the cross, maybe that should show all the death and the blood and the scars and everything that went along with that, and make that's kind of what I'm thinking when you're saying, we don't see it anymore. We've sanitized it. We've cleaned it up. And so you're not going to wear a cross around your neck with Christ on it that's red, full of blood.
Yeah.
It just doesn't fit well with our society today.
Yeah.
But in reality, what you're saying is that's what we need to see, because that's the reality of the crucifixion.
It's really hard to make an argument that violence is bad and should be eschewed when you are a Christian, because the Bible is a Bible that is filled with violence. There is a lot of violence in the Scriptures. And they are dealt with in a very factual kind of visceral way. I mean, I think of the guy who was the guy that was the really big fat guy, and she stabbed him with a knife, and then all of his guts fell out.
And they couldn't get the knife out.
And they couldn't get the knife out because he was so fat that it kind of went into his body. You know, I mean, it's like, you know, that's the kind of thing that's in Scripture, you know.
Yeah.
And then, you know, you talk about like things that we consider to be taboo, like even sex. We had this conversation in pastoral staff the other day, where it's like even things like sex, you know, we're reticent to talk about sex and sexuality in our churches. But then when you read Scripture, God's not shy about talking about sex and sexuality. He's not shy about talking about adultery and its consequences. I mean, how do you talk about David and Bathsheba without talking about sex and sexuality and the consequences of it, which was murder? You know, I mean, it's pretty powerful, you know, and so
it's often been said that if they made a movie about the complete Bible,
it'd be rated R for sure.
Probably X. When you go to a few spots there,
I mean,
and go.
I mean, it would be rated R or rated mature for sure.
You get into the Song of
I don't
Solomon.
know about X because there's not really a whole lot of pornography in it, but you know, it would be mature.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, because it is a mature book.
Yeah, Song of Songs can get pretty.
It's a little racy.
It's a little crazy. You have to read through some of it to understand what they're talking about.
But I'm really talking more about like just the violence that is portrayed in it. You know, I mean, it's like you talk about David's mighty men. You know, I mean, David got thirsty one day, and they went down and destroyed a village, killing everyone to get him a glass of water
that he threw on the ground.
I mean, that's pretty violent on its face. You know, I mean, and David was a man after God's own heart. So, you know, square that away with a taboo on death. You know, I mean, it's not as easy as you might think, and coming up with a morality that kind of talks about that is kind of the problem. I don't know that it's death in general that is in movies. To me, a lot of times it is the nonchalant way in which graphic death is dealt with in an entertainment value kind of way. Like it's utilized as a tool to make something more impactful so that you get more people to watch. And I think that's a mistake because then you just make it into a piece of entertainment. And then that is kind of the opposite way that you want to think about it.
Like the old Westerns and the old cop shows where people are just being shot and killed left and right. The body count just keeps going and going and going.
Gangster movies for sure.
Yeah.
I would say that movies about law and order and justice that deal with death in an appropriate way are actually good for society in general. Which is kind of a weird thing to think, but, you know, we need to know that there are consequences for doing wrong. And, you know, those that wield the sword die by the sword. We know that. But we also know that the sword was given to government to execute justice upon those that do evil. So there is a positive aspect to a heroic archetype that embraces the sword for the benefit of others.
Well, then let's go to the opposite extreme, like slasher movies.
And see, that's the opposite. It's like the glorification of the murderer or the evildoer as the hero, which, yeah, that's a fair point. That's one methodology by which you're now embracing the evil side of that.
Yeah, the first movie I ever saw like that when I was a teen, you probably remember this, is Carrie.
Yeah.
I mean, gratuitous blood.
Yeah.
That set a new mark.
As you guys were talking, I just went to Gladiator. where in the very first part where he's becoming a gladiator and he comes out and he dispatches 4 or 5 guys quite easily, quite quickly, quite handily, very bloody, and the crowd is just dumbfounded.
Yeah,
And he goes, "Are you not entertained?"
Yeah.
And I was like, wait a minute.
Well, no, but
what's wrong with this?
But no, if you understand the concept of that, he was enslaved to be there.
Right.
And when he made that cry, it wasn't him inciting the crowd to cheer. It was him bringing into sharp focus their bloodlust.
Yes.
That's what he was doing. And he was making that's why he is in that movie the heroic archetype as opposed to like the slasher movie.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, he utilized the sword to bring justice. And a slasher utilizes the sword to bring indignity and pain. Yeah, that's a great comparison. Yeah, that's a great way of thinking about that. And that happens a lot in today's society, I think.
It's like, which way are we trending?
Mm-hmm.
We're definitely not trending towards more honor and dignity, and the opposite direction.
Yeah, and a lot of those that deal with realities. You know, I remember if you're talking about like movies that are Westerns, I remember when Unforgiven came out.
Yeah.
And that was a really rough movie to watch because it made you consider what is good and what is evil. In that the guy who was the law enforcement that was supposed to be the law and order and all of that, it turns out that he was utilizing the sword to take advantage of the innocent. And then you have this guy who was a former, what was his name? William Money. He was a former gunfighter, alcoholic, had given all that up to go live on the farm with his daughter and raise her and all that kind of stuff, right? And then he gets to this point where it's just like he understands that I have to embrace the monster in order to bring justice to this evil. And it was a weird way of looking at that whole anti-hero kind of principle. And he utilized violence. It was funny because the whole time he was like, I don't want to do this. He was like reticent to do it. You know, he had this young kid that was just like, let's go kill them all, you know, kind of thing. And he was just kind of like, that's not what you think it's going to be. He's trying to warn him away from it. You know, I mean, it was weird because he was like the keeper at the gate of death. You know, he's like, this isn't what you think that it is. You need to stay away from it because you're not going to get the experience that you think you're going to get. And then when that young kid got to that point where he did have that experience, he couldn't do it. He completely broke down in it.
Yeah. Well, he did it, but he puked his guts out.
Yeah.
Afterwards.
Yeah, because he just couldn't. He couldn't get to the point where he was embracing
what he was doing.
The monster that William Money was capable of embracing. And then he wielded the sword to bring justice. And what's interesting is that if you are honest with your emotions as you're watching that movie as a man, when he embraces that monster to be able to go in and destroy the evil, there's something within you as a man that goes, yes,
good.
Justice has been served. And it speaks to something that's primal, that's within us, that I think that God has built into us, that we can't deny it. It's just there. Right. And so, you know, there's a way that death was portrayed that perhaps was at least at some level moral. But then again, you think about movies like Natural Born Killers, where we're glorifying people that are serial killers just going around murdering people in a drug-induced rage. and we're laughing about it and having a good time, looking at it, I would have a hard time reconciling the spiritual and philosophical value of that, as if it has a net good. I just don't see how it can be good. I don't understand how it can be good.
No,
the glorification of it. To glorify villains is kind of one of the things that is happening in today's society that is also concerning. The heroification of the villain, as opposed to the overcoming of the villain as an evil.
Do you think it's because the emphasis on them then is the violence and death, because there is no noble purpose?
It has to be.
Yeah.
There's nothing else that can
There's
create
nothing redeemable other than the sensation, the excitement.
It has to be sensational because there's no other redeeming quality.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. Yeah. I would say that's probably true.
And I think that we've talked about this before too. It lends itself to the extreme sports, that people are doing. These guys that get these flight suits on and fly down these canyons inches from death. Mm-hmm. They hit a tree, they hit a rock, they're dead. And that just seems to just keep pushing the envelope. Even on motorcycles, bicycles, for goodness sakes. 4 black Phillips. Hey, I got to go 5 now.
You're right. I think that there's a distinct difference between the embracing of death as a tool for an archetype and then the daredevil archetype.
Yeah, definitely.
I think there's definitely a difference. I think the daredevil is not necessarily seeking after an encounter with death or whatever. What they're doing is they're seeking after self-glorification.
The adrenaline.
So there's a little bit of a difference.
Yeah, there is definitely a difference. But ultimately, the way I see it is death is not considered in that.
Well, I mean, I think you're onto something. It is definitely considered. It is the feature by which people watch it.
That's
because
why
if it wasn't death defying, then people would not watch it.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't be interesting.
Yeah,
like Evel Knievel.
Yeah.
Big deal. He's riding a motorcycle, but he's defying death.
Oh, he's jumping a motorcycle that's
yeah.
rocket powered over the Grand Canyon. Yeah, let's watch that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
MMA.
Yeah.
I mean, bare knuckle fighting. I'm like, they put him in a ring. I mean, that's modern day gladiators.
Yeah, and that's a little bit of a different genre. I think that's more inclined to violence as opposed to death, because they don't espouse death on there. In fact,
They don't, but there's been a dozen, deaths in there.
Well, yeah.
Over the years.
Violence is a consequence of, or death is a consequence of violence oftentimes. So, yeah. But I mean.
So, I guess what I'm saying is what we're talking about is death is being glorified? Or death is being portrayed as something that is entertainment, good? I don't know.
Well,
it's got me confused.
I mean, certainly there's a lot of it that is out there. I mean, the statistics that are out there, it's really hard to kind of grab a hold of any statistics that are newer. I did look at some things that there was a University of Virginia study that came out that I was looking at, and it was asking the question: Are modern cultures more inclined to violence than primitive cultures? Because that's oftentimes the argument, and the problem is that there's no clear data. Yeah. There's no way of determining for sure how violent an ancient culture was, other than just the material that they have. And if you take just the media that was available to primitive cultures and you compare it to the media that is now, our media is vastly more violent than ancient media. But that just could be because there's so much more media available. So it could be that we are just as violent, just as inclined to death as ancient cultures. We're just more aware of it, which might lend itself to the desensitization. Desensitization. That's a tough
You're
word,
struggling
man.
with that.
Desensitization.
Desensitization.
Is that even a word?
We've been desensitized.
I'm gonna look it up.
Desensitization.
With the internet and our ability to see things going on the other side of the world as it is happening, certainly is a help in being aware of the death, the violence that
I think
is
we set a
around
new
us.
bar when we started televising drone strikes in the Gulf Wars.
Yeah.
I mean, you're seeing people vaporized before your eyes.
Yes. And it's interesting. I'm not addicted to them, but I like watching police chases. It blows me away. Like, good gravy, that guy's going 120 miles an hour and there's stopped the cars right next to him. That's got to be amazing. And yet, when it comes down to it, if there is any type of violent act happening, such as shooting, they will pan away from that. And I always think, oh, that's weird. You know,
I think that's probably the last frontier
where they
in
do
modern
that.
media.
Yeah.
Is where they stop panning away. And when you actually start seeing
people getting shot.
Well,
intentional. Intentional.
You're saying that
executions
that's
on
not
television.
a thing, but that is a thing. The with all of the cameras and all of the things that we have available to us, death is something that you can see on a regular basis. I mean, you're not going to see it on Facebook or Instagram because their algorithms block those things out.
Right.
But if you take on a platform like X, which does not have a blocking algorithm, it has an algorithm to detect if something might be true or not, and then they look at it. But it doesn't censor things based on some preconceived criteria of what might or might not be beneficial to society. It's just the information. And if you're on there long enough, you'll see death portrayed in a very real way in very different circumstances. Police shootings, people getting hit by trains, people jumping off of cliffs. You know what I mean? It's just, it's there. So, yeah, you know, I mean, they pan away, but there's plenty.
Yeah.
There's plenty that doesn't get panned away from, that's for sure.
That's my point. You know, it's like, okay, that's kind of weird, you know. I'm not ready to see that necessarily, but it's like interesting to me that with so much of this death and murder and, you know, this violence in our society, and it's a whole lot more than we even can imagine. Here's something that is in your face, and yet they protect us from the actual shooting by panning away. I just think that's an unusual and interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting
thing to do.
It's probably because it's going to be on network television, and they wouldn't show that on network television. But there's plenty of space out there with body cam footage and you know, all kinds of stuff of people just getting shot and whatever.
Adrienne is really into these unsolved mysteries, which she's gotten me interested because these
unsolved mystery, man, that's the creepiest theme music ever written.
Well, what's creepy is a lot of these people that murdered in the 50s and 60s, even into the 70s, prior to DNA testing, they're now they're getting these files. New detective comes on and grabs some old file, and they start looking people up and getting their DNA and all this stuff. And guys are 75, 80 years old that committed one murder back in the 50s, and they're going to go to jail because DNA has proven that they were the culprit.
Oh, yeah.
Isn't that crazy? It's like, it's certainly kept me from murdering a few people, you know.
It could
It's
come
it's
back.
a joke, guys.
Yeah.
Because how could you in today's society think you can get away with murder?
Well, you can't. That's like the only way that you could do that would be if it was just completely random.
Random
That would be the only way that you
in
could
the
get away
dark,
with.
no cameras. 3 in
If
the
you
morning.
were related to them in any way, shape, or form, even in the fourth order,
Yep.
you're going to get caught because techniques are so sophisticated now. Unless it's just like a fluke that you
Stray
actually
bullet.
get away with it or whatever. But yeah, it's so hard to get away with crime in this day and age, unless like I said, it's completely random. Which is why a lot of gang crime doesn't get
Right.
solved, because gang crime is by its nature pretty random. You know, it's like a drive-by, or you're like walking by and you see a guy and you end up shooting him because he's wearing the wrong, colors or whatever. I mean, its colors aren't even a thing as much anymore, but there's plenty of that out there, you know, and one thing that you did mention here, which I thought was interesting, because there has been a lot of this. The emphasis on post-apocalyptic or dystopian themes and the rise of zombie culture. You mean I think that's
That was a phenomenon, wasn't it?
I think it's something interesting
so
to talk
glad
about.
It's over.
Yeah, it's you talk about death, but what about undeath? You have a lot of genres out there that deal with a sort of undeath. Vampire movies, for instance, are super popular. I mean, one of the most popular teen movies that ever came out, which was abysmal, Twilight. I said to myself a while back, it's like, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to watch all of these. I'm going to make myself do it so that I can see what it's like, because I just want to make sure I give it a fair shake. And I got through like half of the first movie, and I was just like, I can't do this. This is just ridiculous. Like Kristen Stewart, her character is just so obnoxious in that movie. Like, oh gosh, I know that I'm gonna get a lot of hate for that because there's a lot of Twilight fans out there or whatever. But that, Vampire Diaries, the originals, there's like, and then you have the Living Dead, like, or what's it called? No, The Walking Dead. The Walking Dead has like 5 spinoffs of that show, and it's just basically them in a world filled with zombies. And it turns out that their greatest enemies are actually people themselves. Like, the zombies are only like a tertiary enemy in the whole thing. It's like really more about people doing terrible things to each other to survive, right? Which could possibly be true. Be people that wish for dystopian realities. They have no idea what they're asking for. I mean, that's the last thing that you want, is to live in some kind of dystopian world. But that being said, it's interesting that there is like this kind of rise or prevalence of this zombie character in modern culture. It's like, to some people, it's a free target to shoot at. To some people, it is a kind of maybe a facsimile of or a mockery of death. To some
Do you
people,
think it's an attempt to tap into immortality without morality?
I don't think so, because there's no intelligence in a zombie. So I don't think that there's...
But for a vampire.
For a vampire, for sure. For sure, that's the case. Yeah, a vampire is a completely different issue, because that's a character that lives in undeath, that has powers that enable them to do things that are immoral without the concerns of morality.
Interesting. I don't know why I went there. League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. There was a vampire in that, and they actually used her as a positive, helpful to destroy the enemy, so to speak. So I see stuff like that, and I
Sure.
go, are they trying to make vampires
I mean, there's
okay, acceptable?
well, I mean, I don't think anybody's sitting in their office going, ha 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 ha. Now we're going to make vampires
See,
good.
That's the thing. Maybe
Nah.
there is.
Nah, that's not happening. But as an interesting characteristic, that's not too far outside of the realms of reality. You know, I mean, making a character who is potentially evil, making them the main character, an interesting, avenger of some type. You know, I mean, Shakespeare was famous for doing this, making the macabre the centerpiece and the restorative element of his plays. That's why they were tragedies. So I mean, that's
Beauty and the Beast.
even Marvel has a vampire superhero. You know, I mean, that's nothing new. You know, I mean, you're going to take anything, people give them something that's imaginative, and they're going to create a hero out of it, because that's our nature. We desire a hero.
Mm-hmm.
That song, we need a hero.
Mm-hmm.
I'm holding out for a hero to the end of the night. That song is true. I mean, people desire a hero.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, you will take, they even did that to Frankenstein. Here's a Frankenstein. He's a zombie, basically. But there are movies out there that have made him into the prime hero of the story. So, yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, it's kind of a weird way of approaching that. But also, I mean, we create heroes out of all kinds of things. And that's just one of them.
Witness Donald Trump.
Yeah. I mean, he's the hero maybe that we don't want, but he's the hero that we need maybe right now, or that we deserve for sure. And so, I mean, it's an interesting story, but also that's not traditionally the case when it comes to vampires. They're usually portrayed as immoral agents of chaos in a world of order. And they live in the darkness, and they live a kind of a charade almost, where they kind of pretend to be human, but they're not really. Yeah, it's kind of the whole point. Mm-hmm. And so there's kind of a deeper element there, I think, as far as the way people can perceive them. But yeah, for sure. I mean, it's like there's more vampire movies and vampire shows out now than there ever have been.
What's the difference between a vampire and a demon-possessed human?
Well, I mean, are you asking like technically or like philosophically?
They're so close.
I wouldn't say that.
No.
I wouldn't say that at
Great
all.
question, Ken, but no.
Nah, that's two different things. One
different.
For one is kind of based in kind of a quasi-reality.
One is real.
Yeah, but also if you look at all the instances of demon possession in Scripture, there's never a moment where a demon possesses someone and they become a kind of a superpowered human that can do amazing things, right? It's always to the debasement of humankind or to the insult.
The demoniac.
Yeah, and he
the shackles.
And he cut himself, and
nobody could hold him.
He was cut himself. He was cast outside. He was living in a graveyard. He was unwashed. Everything that he did was there for the purpose of bringing indignity to humankind. Mm-hmm. That's not the case with vampirism. The idea of vampirism is that
a better way of posing that is, in the beginning of the conceptualization of a vampire, could that have been an actual demonic possessed person that was characterized as the vampire?
I don't know. I don't know if it has any. I think the only reality that it has any kind of basis in is the actual medical condition where you you have to there is a medical
Mhm.
condition where you have a blood disease, which it was equated to vampirism. But there's I don't think there was anybody that was demon possessed and they thought, hey, let's write a story about a guy who has no soul but has superpowers and needs to drink blood. It's like,
and for me, that's the thrust of it. When you say vampire, my mind shows these two big fangs on a guy or a gal, and they're going into somebody's throat, and they're sucking their blood out. That's basis
interesting.
of a vampire.
That's interesting because that's not what I think of at all.
Really?
Mm-mm.
Yeah,
But that's what
I'm
they
thinking
do.
having nothing to do with bats, but just in a very human context.
Yeah, I think that's
Just a possibility, something to think about.
the reason that I don't think about that is because, yeah, that's what they do, but also humans eat cheeseburgers too. So it's like not when somebody says,
Cheeseburger? I think of you
like
coming after this cheeseburger
when somebody
with your mouth
says
open.
When somebody says, outlaw, I don't think, well, he goes to the bar and he eats a steak. That's not what I think of. I think of all the other things that kind of go around that. But I can see why you would think that, because that's the thing that gets emphasized
Right.
in a lot of the horror movies. But in a lot of the movies that are coming out now, I think in an attempt to sophisticate them, they're more intelligent. They're aged, so there's a lot of wisdom. They are manipulative in that they are in control of their world and the world outside of them. And they're powerful. And their power is concealed in this kind of hidden world where they don't want to bring themselves out because they know that mankind would destroy them if they got found out. So they kind of lurk in the shadows. It's kind of like this story of a creature that has this unfortunate curse of drinking blood and has to live in this world of subterfuge. That's kind of the way that it's portrayed today.
Well, and I go back to, again, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, the gal that was the vampire, and the rest of the group.
Yeah.
The rest of the gentlemen accepted that, which was weird to me. It was like they looked at her
also
like,
had an invisible
"Oh."
guy. So
yeah.
they accepted that too.
But they had the American with his 30 caliber carbine too.
He was pretty cool. He was pretty cool. Yeah.
Anyway,
and so was
we
Alan
digress.
Quartermain. Alan
Yeah.
Quartermain was pretty cool too. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
So anyways, I mean, there is an aspect of undeath as well that is pervasive in culture as well. So, and, I mean, we didn't even get into music. I think that probably, it might be a good idea to bring that up at some point.
Yeah. Real quick, I want to do his last point on movies. Slasher movies in particular feature plenty of sex and large teenage body counts. In 1981, 25 slasher movies were ranked among the top 50 or the 50 top grossing films of the year. So that says at that time, there were a lot of people really interested in those movies.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to the owner of a video store. It said the majority of horror movies that get rented are by females 18 to 25. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
That didn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
But I asked a few, being a youth leader at the time, I asked a few of the girls, why do you like those? And they said, we like to be scared and huddle together. And then at the end of most of those movies, the bad guy gets it. Not all of them. Some of them, they can't even go to bed.
Sequel. Gotta leave room for the sequel.
Yeah. It's like, I can't go to bed tonight because that guy's still out there.
I think that a lot of this we kind of need to readdress next week and maybe have a second part to this so we can kind of get into some of these other things, because I would really like to focus in on the music aspect of it, because I think that that's more influential in our world than we think that it is. And then with particularly like the post self and the way that we perceive ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe one of the things we can do before we get out of this particular episode is to kind of talk about what the Bible says about death and how, a Christian worldview that's based on biblical principles might view death. And the first thing, obviously, is that it is the result of sin
Mm-hmm.
and living in a fallen world. I mean, death is kind of the most final thing of our world. And we know that it is appointed unto man once to die, and then the judgment, right? We know that that it is an inevitability. But we also know that Jesus Christ, when he died on the cross of Calvary and he rose again on the third day, that he didn't just have victory over sin, he had victory over sin and death.
Amen.
So in reality, death is really just a shadow. And it kind of brings into focus, Psalms when it says, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. It's the valley of the shadow of death. It's not the valley of death. It's the valley of the shadow of death, because it's really just a shadow. It's not something that we should be afraid of, which I think is where you're coming in with Romans chapter 8, verses 38 and 39. It's like, it's not something that we should be afraid of. For I am sure that neither death nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of our God in Christ Jesus our Lord. Neither death nor life. There's nothing to be afraid of other than the finality of it. And I think that's kind of what people are more afraid of, especially Christians. I'm not concerned about where I'm going. I am concerned about leaving people behind.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I am concerned about the method of which I go. And I hope that God would give me the grace to be able to face my mortality in as dignified a way as possible. But then again, I have no way of knowing what that's going to look like. And so there's always this fear, because it is kind of like looking in the mirror. It's like, one of the things that's interesting about that verse of scripture that you brought up, and the only reason that I included it was because it said in 1 Corinthians 13:12, we look through a mirror dimly, but then face to face. And that word dimly is used there on purpose, because that word dimly is the Greek word where we get the word enigma. It's a mystery. It's something that is veiled in just enough of a shadow that we could just barely make it out. And I think that's why we're fascinated with death.
Yeah.
Because it's like we could just barely make it out. We've seen just enough of it that we're like, okay, we know it's real.
What is it really?
What is it? What is it
What's it
like?
like?
What is it when you close your eyes for the first time and your consciousness leaves your body? What is that moment like? I think that terrifies people, as it should, because it's like the last adventure that you'll ever go on in this world. And so, but that being said, if you're a believer, you know where you're going, you know your destination, and you hope that the trip there is not as scary as you might think that it is.
Mm-hmm. Amen to that.
It might be that it's rather pleasant. And I think about all the times where I hear people talk about loved ones that have passed away, and as they pass away, you just kind of see this look of peace go over their face. It's just like, oh, I can go home now. And then they just kind of smile, or they just kind of relax, and then they just kind of go
Take
away.
that last breath.
And I think for believers, for the most part, that's probably what happens. Unless you're just a person that obsesses about the fear of death, which is something you probably should talk to someone about.
Yeah.
But being of the world, or being secular as opposed to sacred,
That's a whole different.
I don't know how you could you would have to think of it as just going to sleep into oblivion and never waking up again. That's the only way that you could think of it. Because anything else is just terrifying. Just nothing scares me more than oblivion. Oblivion is a terrifying thought.
Yeah, it reminds me when I was witnessing to a guy in the Netherlands, and he's a brilliant genius of a man. And I was witnessing to him, and he said, well, you know, if I'm right, it's no big deal. But if you're right, I'm in a whole lot of trouble.
Absolutely.
He understood
Mm-hmm.
the consequences of the position that he had taken. And I don't know where he eventually wound up on that.
Mm-hmm.
He probably made some kind of philosophical peace with it without.
There's actually a name for that. I'll have to look it up and give it to you, but there's actually a name for that idea where it's like if you're a believer and you're right, then if you die and there truly is nothing, you have lost nothing.
Right.
But if you are right and there is a savior, there is a heaven to be gained and a hell to be shunned, then you've gained everything, right? There's some missionary or evangelist or something that kind of coined that thought, and there's a name for that idea. I can't. It escapes me right now what that is. I'm sorry, but I'll figure it out and try and bring it up.
Or send us an email at
Or send you, yeah,
BethelBaptistChurch.org.
yeah. If you know what it is, send us
Do
an
your
email.
research.
We'd love to read your research. So don't be afraid. It is the believer's last step to being with Christ, because we know that to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. This is something that we know for sure. And so we don't have to be concerned about where we're going. But for the unbeliever, it is a doorway to judgment. It's a point when a man wants to die, and then the judgment, right? So, I mean, that's not something great to look forward to. And then eternal punishment. The idea that there is eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels, and that eternal fire after the resurrection is where those that have rejected Christ will be cast.
For eternity.
For eternity.
That's unfathomable. Is that a word?
It's as much of a word as, what was the one I was trying to... Desensitization. Yeah. So, yeah, for sure. There's a lot to think about. And as a Bible believer, it's like violence is unavoidable. These things that are taboo, these things that are taboo to us are unavoidable. And I'm concerned that we have tabooed our way into a soft Christian culture.
Agreed.
I'm just concerned enough that I'm beginning to kind of voice my concerns about it. I haven't really thought too much about it until recently, but my concern is that we have gotten so taboo about subjects that we are becoming soft in the education of those subjects. Subjects like death and violence, subjects like sex and sexuality. It's like
sin.
Sin.
We need to, I think we do, but I think we could preach it more from the pulpit. Sin. Yeah. This is what separates us, guys, from our Savior.
Yeah.
And some of us are just filled with it,
which is
don't
why
even realize it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Which is why topics like pursuing holiness are so important.
Yeah, absolutely.
And thinking about the choices that you make. Like profanity, for instance. It's like, can you make a case that profanity is definitely a sin? Probably not. Can you make a case that corrupt communication is sinful? Yes, absolutely. But what is corrupt communication? That could be anything. It could be profanity. It could be foul speaking about someone not using profanity at all. So But that being said, if you're pursuing Christ likeness, then is it really good to have a lot of profanity in your life? You know, is there a limit to what you're willing to allow? You know, and is it right at all? Is it
Well,
a
I think
great
it's
question?
like everything else. It goes to motives, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is your motive in choosing that word? Is it edifying, kind, building something up, or is it tearing something down?
Is it causing your brother to stumble?
That's a great one. That's a great point. You know, is it causing your brother to stumble? Obviously, if you're in a situation and you're cursing and it's causing your brother to have issues, like you know, I mean, like if I were a person that were, you know, I didn't think anything of the F word, like most probably Christian Scotsmen are. You know, I might get around you, and if you told me you were offended by that and that it really kind of didn't allow you to have
wasn't growing my
good,
spirituality.
it wasn't helping you any at all.
Yeah.
It was not.
Yeah.
It was not good. Then you know, I as a Christian would say, okay, well, it doesn't matter what I think about it. All that matters is that it's offending my brother, and I don't want to do that, right? But then on the other side of that, you know, it's like that's true, but you have to be able to talk about those things. You have to be able to discuss those things. You have to be able to teach those things, right? And you know, on the topics of violence and sexuality and all that, we have to really be mindful that we aren't tabooing ourselves out of the instruction that all generations need. And then approaching that appropriately. Because given that there is an age appropriateness to talking about those things, we need to be considering that, obviously. But then also, we obviously do not need to be not teaching about sin because of X, Y, or Z. Right? So, you know, that's a question that is just hanging out there. It's like, when is it appropriate? When is it not appropriate? When should you? When shouldn't you? So, you know, I mean, the issue of taboo probably is an interesting conversation. You know, what is and what should be considered taboo, or should there be such a thing as taboo?
I think that's the big question to ask.
Yeah.
Should anything be off limits entirely, categorically?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And if it's not, then how should it be approached? Wisely.
That's the key.
Wisely.
How do we do that?
Yeah, that's the two questions that need to parallel themselves in that conversation. But like death, for instance, you know, I mean, this is not like a podcast you would share with your children, obviously. But, you know, it might help you to make a decision on, okay, well, maybe I do need to talk to my child about death and what that means, right? And particularly if your kids are involved in like video games or something like that, you know, this might be a good opportunity to talk about, you know, death and justice and rightness. And I can recall a time in our household where my oldest son bought a game for the PlayStation. It was the Hulk game where you were the Hulk and you went around town. And one of the features of this game was things were destructible. So you could destroy buildings and cars and things like that. And I came across him and I was witnessing him utilizing that destructible environment to harm innocent people. And I was like, no, this is not acceptable. You know, if you want to go fight a villain and destroy a villain, that's one thing. But I'm not going to watch you harm innocent people. That's not going to happen, which is one of the reasons I will never condone games like Grand Theft Auto. You know, anything that glorifies the idea that you're just stealing stuff and there's no heroic virtue to it, that to me is just gratuitous violence for the sake of violence and crime.
One of the issues I have with the the shooting games as well is that, dang, where are you? How are you killing me so many times? because you just wait 5 seconds and you got a new body and a new guy and a new gun and away you go. And I'm thinking,
Yeah.
that's not even close to reality.
Yeah, that's true. There are military studies that demonstrate that it is actually a net good to have that experience, but also be able to replay it. Because I think that given the opportunity to know whether something is real or whether something is not, most people
Right.
are going to be like, if you got into a circumstance where you're in a shopping center and someone is shooting at you, you're not going to run up on them because you think you're going to get another life.
Shooting.
That's not a thing. Although I'll give you that there are probably people out there that have enough psychopathy that they can look at that and think that that is true. In that case, that is not healthy for them. And in that case, it's shame on the parents for not being involved.
Yeah.
But to just draw a line in the sand and say all this stuff is bad and all this stuff is good. Yeah. Good luck with that. I hope you find success.
Yeah.
Because
it's the quote unquote teachable moment.
Exactly.
You're observing that, make sure your children know that this isn't reality.
Exactly. But still, you can't deny that that death is a component of our society. And I think that next week when we get into music a little bit more, I think you'll see that played out a little bit better than even in movies. And its direct effect on culture.
Yeah.
And we're going to say some things probably next week, or at least I'm going to say some things next week that are probably going to get some people pretty mad.
Yay.
But it needs to be said because there's some cultural components to that need to be addressed that it seems like everybody's afraid to address. And so, tune in next week. That's going to be good for that. Do you have any final words, Ken, for this episode?
Yeah, I'm reminded of it's kind of a cliche to, as they say, make your dash count. That's when they put your headstone in the ground. And it has the year of your birth and the year of your death, and there's a dash in between. We all are going to die if we don't get raptured out of here. And so what really matters is what you do in the meantime, that your dash counts for something. And there's a lot that you can do no matter who you are. And so as you consider your mortality, however much time you have left, what are you going to do to make a difference in this world before you check out?
Right.
And make that your life mission, not accumulating material things, not chasing adrenaline, not chasing whatever it may be, but leaving something of dignity and value and honor behind that was worth you being here for others, not just yourself.
Yeah, that's a great point.
An epitaph.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lasting legacy.
Other than I told you I was sick, right?
Or, oops, I didn't see that.
Yeah. Hold my beer. Watch this.
What about you, Greg?
Well, I was just thinking, we've encouraged parents to have the sex talk with your children before somebody else does. So just like anything else, that has become a younger and younger excursion into embarrassment and fright and many other emotions for parents. But death is also a part of life. It's imminent. And I think that that too is a good subject for parents to sit down with their children and discuss, and discuss it from a Christian viewpoint. That it is as you said earlier, it's a shadow. It's a transition point for us. It's not finite, and to give children a hopeful thought to the future instead of devastation.
I think that's one of
finality.
The biggest benefits of having a pet in the house.
How so?
Yeah, you get to really face...
Because that animal's going to die probably in that child's childhood.
Yeah.
There's your perfect opportunity to have that talk.
Ask a farm kid if they understand death.
Yeah, they get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think I would say this, like, there's probably something in this podcast that you have disagreed with at some point. And I would say this, instead of assuming that, that we're wrong and you're right, and instead of trying to educate us, because this happens, people try and educate us as far as like how we were wrong or whatever the case may be. Instead of doing that, do this instead. Send us an email with a thought out argument, and I would be glad to read that. I'm always willing to admit that I'm wrong about something if I am the recipient of a compelling argument. But your stupid duty pants is not a compelling argument, right?
You better show some receipts.
Yeah. And so, just demonstrate it. I mean, if you've listened this long, it means that you're absorbing knowledge, which is good. If you have a disagreement, I'd love that. Disagreement is how you get to truth. So, write out your disagreement, write out your proof text, show us, demonstrate to us, how you have arrived at your conclusion. And you know what? Here's the good thing, right? It's just like anything else. If we talk about your argument on the show, we'll send you a world famous 3P mug. I don't know if you're getting our emails or not, but the thing about it is that Trump himself has endorsed our 3P mugs. We got a picture of him holding one.
It's going to be presidential.
Yeah.
It's called Photoshop.
It seems photoshopped.
It seems.
It looks photoshopped. I'm not going to say that it is or isn't.
That was our disclaimer right there.
But it's there. The photo evidence is there, right? Whether it's true or not.
And if you're really good and we really like your response, we have an extra microphone here.
Exactly. Yeah.
If you really want to put it up.
Yep.
We'll have you on.
And if you've ever heard any episodes where Richard and I are in the same room together, you know that we do love to debate and
anything
and have conversations about. That's true. Like even before this show, I was arguing with Greg about movies and Christian movies. And,
Can I tell that story real quick? I walked into Chris's office and I said something. I don't even remember what the topic was. I said something, and Chris comes back, and I'm like, and then I go back, and we were standing there arguing, and I stopped and I said, "You don't really believe what you're telling me, do you?" And he goes, "No, I just like arguing." And that opened my mind to a whole different person.
Yeah. Here's the thing, right? It's easy to not debate someone and just assume that everything that you know is true. But everything of value that I have in my life that has helped me to grow as an individual has been the result of someone having a debate or an argument or a conversation with me and proving to me that I was wrong or demonstrating that there was something flawed about my thought process. And that's a lost art in today's society, and it needs to have a resurgence.
Or in the same vein, you've proven right many times,
and that happens too.
Edifies others.
Yep, and it's a growth process, and it's absolutely essential. And we need to get back to that for sure. But that could be another conversation. That could be a really good conversation about the value of debate and argument,
and of speaking up.
There's
a really great lecture that Jordan Peterson does on this.
About speaking up. Yeah, he uses Jonah as an illustration in one of those where he talks about how Jonah had the instruction to go and speak truth to a group of people, and him choosing to not stand up and speak what was given to him led to heartache among a whole bunch of people that did not include just himself. So that is an interesting conversation for sure. All right, well, that about our engineer is over here like squirming because he's like, "Gosh, are you guys ever gonna shut up?" Good grief! He's falling asleep over there. He's like, All right. Well, that about does it for us today. As always, thank you for joining us. If you have a comment or a question or an idea for an episode, send us an email to 3p@ethelbaptistchurch.org, where Ken is eagerly anticipating your email. If your idea gets used on a show, you could be the proud recipient of the now world-famous 3P coffee mug. If you enjoyed this episode, please give it a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Thanks again to ABC and its members for their generous support of this ministry. And again, thank you for listening. And until next time, remember the Great Commission. Go into all the world, reach the lost with the gospel, and build disciples who can do the same. And with that, we are out.